Thank you, everybody. I'm going to start, obviously, because I've only got 15 minutes as well. I'm Michael Sani, and have the honour of working on a little movement called Bite the Ballot, which is essentially to try and engage and empower our youngest citizens so that they can understand the system that currently constrains them and evolve British democracy. I do believe in the power of participation. It's an interesting story about how the movement started, because it was an idea in a classroom. I was 27 years old, and my boss asked me 3 weeks before the general election if I was going to vote. And I said, no, I don't vote. Politics doesn't affect me. And he sort of slapped me down, really. He was 34 years older than me and said, well, Mike, you drove here today. Politics determines petrol prices when the roads are fixed. You went out at the weekend. Politics determines whether that nightclub can have a late licence or a dance floor. You buy food, you play sport, etc., etc., etc. And I kind of had this realisation that, shit, why don't I know any of this? And how have I taught in 2 educational establishments, one a pupil referral unit, which is essentially last chance saloon for anyone who's not quite academic, and we punish them for being naughty, and then a comprehensive state school. No one is told about the current system, how to get involved, how to register to vote. So we were essentially only going to do a school project. We asked the 85 sixth formers at that school if they were going to vote. Everybody said no. And you suddenly realise, well, I was a business studies teacher, so I just put the business studies cap back on. And I thought, well, this might be a niche market then. If no one's doing this properly, what can we do? So as I say, it was only supposed to be a school project. And then we rolled it out. Sometimes I wish I didn't go to work that day because I might still be in my little bubble. But I lie. Of course, I love the fact that I'm outside of my comfort zone continuously. And the realisation that as you try and progress, you're greeted with barriers and hurdles unnecessarily and mainly from the institution actually excites us now. Because when we get sort of this onslaught of bureaucracy or unnecessary nonsense from people like the Cabinet Office or some of the political parties, we just continuously learn. And we're like, okay, well, they've tried to stop us by doing this. So how did we get round it? Okay, we'll know for next time. And we're getting better. So I just want to talk to you about some of the steps in which we're trying to engage a whole generation of people that arguably are consumers long before they're ever classed as citizens. And we boiled it down to 5 simple steps, essentially. The first one was engagement. If I'm a younger person who currently believes that politics is a load of old shit and nothing will ever change, I mean, let's just comprehend that right now. Nothing will ever change. Have you ever heard a 15-year-old say, there's no point, nothing will ever change? It's actually heartbreaking. It really is. One of probably my strongest sort of characteristics, and equally something that really gets me down, is I feel a lot of empathy. So I go around the country, going into classrooms and pupil referral units and youth clubs, and when I hear that, it just chips away at me. And then at the same time, I try and galvanise that frustration and let it energise what we're trying to do, because everything can fucking change. It has done. We're continuously changing, and we might not be able to see it in the moment when we're in it, but when we step back, let's just look at things like the civil rights movement. Of course, in today's society, it's absolutely fucking embarrassing that there's still inequality when it comes to race. It's embarrassing. But what they did, they moved things forward. The Suffragettes, they moved things forward. Imagine if those 2 movements could communicate like we can now. We're the most connected society, well, we're the most connected time ever. And that excites me, and that's what we tried to do. That's what we're trying to do. We're trying to use the tools that are out there. We're trying to mobilise people, move them around the internet, engage them, online engagement, and then call for offline social action, of course non-violent. So engagement, what did we do? We did a little project online called Leaders Live, and we brought the party leaders to a studio environment where we had 15 idols and influencers, mainly YouTubers, and they acted as the mouthpiece for their wider network. So we had people in the audience that are on their phone, and they've got 3.5 million fans or subscribers. And they posted the question, oh, we've got Natalie Bennett here, we've got Ed Miliband, we've got Nigel Farage, and we're talking about education, what do you want to know? And as I say, they acted as the mouthpiece. And it was really special, because some people that were at home already thinking politics is boring and it's not for them, began to just move the word politics over to this side and start to talk about issues. And they engaged. 1.8 million minutes of that footage has been watched on YouTube. 65,000 comments, 25,000 hashtags. And people started to mobilise. So engagement was done. We couldn't storm in and start to say to people died for the right to vote, because we need to understand that this age group, the age group I'm really interested in inspiring social action, they've got their own problems, their own modern day problems. So when we try and go at them with history, sometimes they step back and say, well, what does that actually mean for me? My mum can't afford to pay the rent. We're doing this, we're doing that. And actually, you sometimes hear people say, I don't give a fuck who died for my right to vote. It means nothing. And you can't greet that with anger, because, of course, you want to try and get people to understand the civil rights movement and the marches in Selma, but there's a time and a place. And you have to really bring someone on a journey. That is the crucial thing that I'm trying to sort of put forward, and the great people I work with and collaborate with. It's an ethos that this is an absolute journey, and it's a long one, and one vote won't change everything. But as I said at the start, let's understand the system that constrains us and mobilise and then pick it apart, because if we're all engaged and we're all educated, then we can start to point fingers. We demand greater transparency, and things that happen and get brushed under the carpet because we're all busy watching programs, made-up programs about made-up people and their made-up lives, we then might turn and think about our own lives and how we change things. So engagement was the first step. Then we moved to registration. Registering to vote. And I'm not saying that voting is indeed the be-all and end-all. It's just one part of being an active citizen. Of course it is, and I do want to see an onslaught of young people registering to vote. And some of you might have seen this week was National Voter Registration Day on Thursday. Without any support from the institution or the government or the Cabinet Office, we mobilised, we worked with a collective of partners, we wrote social briefs asking them how to move people around the internet, what to do, how to word the language. And this week, over 400,000 people registered to vote. And we didn't spend a penny. We just engaged. And I get a bit frustrated, really, within the third sector, because I'm new to it. I was a teacher. I had no idea how to run a business, really, in the sense of trying a business that had a social cause rather than a profit-making cause. And it does become quite difficult. Companies' House is an absolute nightmare. Auditing, oh, for fuck's sake! I just want to get involved. I just want to move this about. But we're constantly greeted with these things that the system imposes on us, and it is hard and it is long. But this week was pretty special. And we even had a projection on Big Ben on Wednesday night. I'm not sure if anyone saw it because it didn't get any traditional press. But fuck the traditional press. You don't need it. We don't need it. It's dying out, thankfully. Of course, we'll still take the odd interview and do things, because I still believe an element of change can start from within. You must. So there's other stakeholders that will still read the papers and watch the evening news, but the generation that we're really passionate about communicating with are online or they're out in their communities, and that's why it's a big focus about being on the ground and being there talking with people, but being online so that they can see a funny post and begin to start thinking about things. So after registration, one of the initial things that come out when we started Bite the Ballot was people like, well, I don't know who to vote for. I don't get it. So we thought, all right, well, then we'll move to education. So we're trying to make a series of tools. We're going to make a version of a sort of voter advice application, but it's going to be sort of issue-focused, and you go in, and it's like Tinder for politics, if I can say that, because you sort of swipe policies you don't agree with, you swipe policies you do, and it starts to give you a collation of, oh, well, you might be aligned with this particular party, you might be, and obviously then you try and push people to further reading. But the key about that, at the end, is a gamified experience, and at the end, I really want, if I've played it, I want to see, well, I've got, oh, all right, I've got this many policies that relate to that coloured party, I've got this many policies that relate to that coloured party, and then I ask myself, do I go with the party that comes up the most? Is that because I'm most aligned to them? Do I go with the issue I care about the most? Or indeed, if, like many people do, I feel that no one represents me, then I'd actually promote spoiling your ballot. I really would, because I think, although, yes, you can mobilise from within, and most people will say, oh, that's a wasted vote. Of course it's not a wasted vote, people. If people don't turn up at all, then they just get categorised. And the mainstream press will say, oh, they're apathetic. That's bullshit. No one's apathetic. You can't be apathetic unless you know everything there is to know, and then you say, it's not for me. And for this particular generation, they don't know anything. They're not told. They're not engaged at school. Why? Because the system writes the education curriculum. Of course it does. It's repressive, and that's reality. I taught in it for 5 years. And when you try and go up the chain of command to the people at the top, the head teacher says, you know what, shouldn't we really be telling everyone about registering to vote? Not just to vote, but so we can have a representative jury service, so that people can take control of their credit rating, so that people can be in charge of their identity. And you get greeted with things like, oh, yeah, we can't tell people what to teach. What do you mean? You've got these other 15 subjects on the curriculum that you're telling people they must teach. Can't we squeeze this one in? Disaster. But as the great Tony Benn said, you don't need to go to the top for change. The best and biggest and most exciting changes come from the ground up, and they always will. And this event today is absolutely phenomenal. Just walking around, catching the end of little speeches, going out in the courtyard, listening to people talking, and the diversity that's here. Earlier I was in this room, there was a parent with 2 young children. They might not acknowledge what they're part of, but how special one day when they become more and more activists that you can point out and say, you was there, you was 6, you was making lots of noise while someone was talking, but you were there. So education is key, and then we must move to the inspiration. We need to galvanise people to want to get involved. And we tried to do a concert. It sounds like it's pretty cheap because we want to try and get idols and influencers, someone that's on your iPod and you like them, to just show a socially conscious side by really stepping up and talking about an issue. And we tried and we tried, and we got the Roundhouse, the Camden Roundhouse, and we had artists like Rita Ora and Professor Green and all sorts, because there was demand, but we couldn't find a pissy bit of money to make the event happen, so we pulled it. We're not going to do it now, which is a shame. But the last thing that we are going to really concentrate on is turnout. We want to get this generation to go and do walking trains where they're up early and they're walking with their neighbours to go to the polls. I want to see students turn up, regardless of who they're voting for, but they're just there. They're being active and they're voicing their concerns. Because if we do treat this like a journey, then, all right, we can turn around and say, well, nothing changes, but we can just come together at this start and treat it like a long-term journey, which is exactly what it is. And get people to go, vote for the first time, whether it's spoiling their ballot or voting for a party, but then becoming more and more active so that they can challenge injustice and inequality together, because this generation are powerful. They're the change makers. They're creating the social networks that David Cameron's trying to close down. They're creating the new businesses that are outside of the norm. Imagine if we had them actively wanting to evolve our democracy because they can understand, again, the system that constrains them, but they're willing to move forward and pick it apart piece by piece. It is long-term, but it can get there. And I truly believe that events like this, more and more people talking, is the key. It's all it is. We just got to communicate, and we need people to start to acknowledge that feeling in your tummy there, that is, you're feeling empathy to injustice. Now, what do? Do you turn a blind eye, or do you do something about it? And it's down to all of us to support that, intergenerational, whether we're grandparents talking to our grandkids or we're youngsters talking to our grandparents. It's exciting times.